Welcome to the Literature Lounge, where writers and authors share their stories behind their stories.
Native Americans would pray and sing to potatoes, and contemporary Americans also pray and sing to potatoes through McDonald's jingles. It's a weird transition from spirituality to materialism. When the Buddha is talking about eradication of craving, he's basically talking about addiction. Now we can see it in terms of dopamine. We have a much better understanding. I also suffered from addiction to alcohol. The reason I was drinking was because I was looking for connection. I was looking for love. All I wanted was a warm embrace. And I couldn't find that except through alcohol. Once you discovered that, your mind or your brain somehow thinks that it mistakes the alcohol for love, and it becomes the only pathway to love that you can find. And the way out is self-love.
Ever wondered what it truly means to follow your bliss, especially when your life is tangled with regrets, family struggles, and unspoken shame? How do spirituality, politics, and personal transformation intersect to shape the way we view the world and ourselves? What happens when a middle-aged economist decides to let go of his ego, embrace vulnerability, and embark on a journey of self-discovery? Aren't you wanting to know all of this? And how does the fear of shame hold us back, particularly in South Asian families where respectability can hide deeper, darker truths? In today's episode, we'll explore these questions and more with Rajeev Balasubramanyam, author of Professor Chandra Follows His Bliss. Rajeev is a writer, thinker, and storyteller whose work delves deep into themes of spirituality, family dynamics, and personal evolution. His novel offers a powerful look at one man's quest for happiness, exploring addiction, family legacy, and the transformative role of meditation. If you're ready to rethink personal growth, relationships, and what it means to truly live your purpose, this episode is for you. So let's just quickly dive in. Welcome, Rajeev, in today's episode.
Thank you.
So, Rajiv, can you tell us a little bit about the inspiration behind Professor Chandra Follows His Bliss? I think most, journalists who are going to talk to you about your book will ask you about the inspiration. But what sparked the idea for this book? Let's talk also about the protagonist, Professor Chandra, who's a complex character, brilliant yet flawed. I could relate so much of my father in him. What did you want to explore through his character, and why did you choose to focus on someone of his age and profession?
Well, my father is an economist, and I grew up around Indian economists. That was my whole childhood, was economists and academics. And the world has been fashioned by economists who, in my opinion, have a very limited understanding of what it means to be human. They reduce being human to a line, often with very good intentions. They sort of believe that humans are out to maximize profit and maximize consumption, and that's kind of it. Whereas actually we're much more complex than that, and we're emotional beings. So I wanted to look at that, and I wanted to look at what would happen if such a person made that transition from viewing humans in quantitative terms to viewing them in emotional and spiritual terms. And you have to start with yourself to do that. But I think that that's what will kind of start to free us from neoliberalism, is if we make that transition away from materialism to viewing ourselves as spiritual and emotional beings with spiritual and emotional needs, not just economic ones. So that's really the basis for the novel. I also went through that same transition myself. It's just I was more on the left rather than neoliberalism, but the Marxist left often looks at it in the same way. It's material, material, material. So I wanted to make that transition.
The whole world looks at it material, 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 Rajiv, and this is where the world is going, and it's just getting so dystopian. And it's really frightening. So let's just talk a little bit about the book, where it takes Chandra to various locations, including California and a Zen center in Colorado. So how do you see the settings, as contributing to the themes of the novel, and were these places chosen for their symbolic significance? So tell our listeners a little bit more.
Well, part of it is that I've been to these places, and I was writer in residence at a Zen center in the Colorado mountains and in New York City. I had a fellowship. I really wanted to be in America about 10 years ago, less so now. But 10 years ago, I really had this longing to be there. And then I got this fellowship for writers with a spiritual practice. And they basically paid me to meditate. And I lived as a monk, essentially, for some months, and went from one place to another. And, it's this funny thing of India becoming more materialistic, and then suddenly there's this explosion of spiritual thought in the Western world. A lot of it is kind of disturbingly intertwined with materialism, and yet within that framework, people are trying to extricate themselves from materialism. And I saw that throughout the US, including people who still were very committed to becoming billionaires in the middle of their lives. They still had this need for spirituality. And the place in Colorado is interesting for me because it's the intersection of, first of all, Native Americans, which had essentially an opposite philosophy to contemporary America, but contemporary America was built on top of that. You know, like a
Oh,
lot of
yeah,
churches were built
absolutely.
on Native American burial grounds, and you know, Native Americans would pray and sing to potatoes, and contemporary Americans also pray and sing to potatoes through McDonald's jingles. You know, it's a weird transition from spirituality to materialism. So there's that symbolism of that place in Colorado. It was a place very sacred to nature. In fact, I think they consider it the most sacred place. It's also supposed to be the conjunction of various ley lines. And it's the spiritual Epcot Center of the United States, a place called Crestone. I've renamed it in the book. And there are some, you know, dozens and dozens of spiritual centers. There's like 5 Tibetan Buddhist places. There's 2 Theravada. There's a Catholic hermitage. There's 2 Hindu ashrams. There's all kinds of New Age stuff. It's all there, and it's wild and crazy, and it's happening in the United States of all places. And it was land that a billionaire bought, and he sort of gave it over to spirituality. So that was why I said it.
Yeah, so the book touches on themes of addiction and recovery, particularly through Jasmine's storyline. So, how did you want to portray the complexities of drug use and rehabilitation in the context of a family really struggling to reconnect? And I see this playing out, in the future, because families today are really struggling to reconnect. And this answer of yours would really help a lot of our listeners.
Well, you know, addiction is everywhere.
Yes.
Everybody has addictions. And
Oh, yeah.
it's a part of what it means to be human. You know, when the Buddha is talking about eradication of craving, he's basically talking about addiction. You know, now we can see it in terms of dopamine. We have a much better understanding, but often we haven't. But it's so stigmatized, particularly in middle class families, as being indicative of being bad, and there's this obsession with status and respectability. And often the people who stigmatize it the most are the people with addictions themselves, you know.
True. I'm
It's
sorry, but it's true.
it's so common, and I also suffered from addiction to alcohol, and I know what it's like, and I know that it's nothing to be ashamed of. You feel deeply ashamed of yourself, but what I realized in my own um, path out of addiction was that for me, alcohol was love. The reason I was drinking was because I was looking for connection. I was looking for love. All I wanted was a warm embrace. And I couldn't find that except through alcohol. And once you discovered that, your mind or your brain somehow thinks that it mistakes the alcohol for love, and it becomes the only pathway to love that you can find. Um, and the way out is self-love. If you can give to yourself what the alcohol or the drug is giving to you, that's how you come out of addiction. There's no other way to do it. But the idea that we need to treat addicts as if they're somehow bad people and and shun and scorn them, to me, that's a very barbaric way of treating people. But it is kind of the norm. It's the same way that we cover up abuse. We'd rather cover up abuse than actually help the person being abused or stop the abuse. You know, the
Yeah.
most important thing is just to sweep it under the carpet. I think that's very, very common in middle class families.
It's common everywhere. People just want to sweep everything under the carpet. They don't want to talk about it. But I really want to delve a little bit more about self-love. So Rajiv, you have to tell me a little bit more as to how did you get into that space? I think it's the toughest, just to learn to love yourself, to say good things about yourself. I often find myself that when people compliment me, I don't even know how to take that compliment, because you're always so used to finding flaws with yourself. And it's all a journey. And so tell me a little bit about, how did you get to that space of self-love?
Well, I tried a lot of different things. In the end, what I do now is through my meditation. I meditate regularly, as often as you can with a 2-year-old, And towards at the end with the metta practice, I always give love to myself. And then I use that to give love to other people. To me, it always starts with yourself. So it's that practice of metta for me has been the probably the most powerful thing. But the other thing, perhaps even more powerful that I've done, is to observe the voice of the ego inside of me, which is this composite of all the critical voices that we've heard in our lives, parents, teachers, and, contemptuous relatives, and just listen to it abusingly. And the more I can listen, I've heard it say, one day I just remember it was just screaming at me, oh, yeah, I was like, okay, Jesus Christ. So I was just lying down and listening to it. And what I found is that doing that every day, or, at various times throughout the day, you get overwhelmed or you start to lose confidence or feel anxious or feel self-loathing. It creates a separation between one you and another you through this sort of deep I and the ego is basically what's happening. And once you realize it's the ego telling you all these unpleasant things about yourself and not you, then you're free to feel a lot better about yourself. And I find that's much more effective than positive self-talk, which I'm a little bit suspicious of, because that feels like kind of trying to get into a fight with the ego, and the ego is so powerful
Yeah,
that,
hugely powerful.
yeah, so that I don't see that that you can't really fight the ego.
So let's talk about Steve. Chandra's ex-wife, new husband, is a former hippie, who seems to live by a different set of values. How does Chandra's confrontation with Steve, especially the punch to his nose, symbolize his struggle between old world values and new world ideas, which is such a struggle? And tell us a little bit more about this.
Well, Steve is a product of the 60s, so he's a progressive. He was a former hippie. He does various meditation practices. But the problem with Steve, I suppose, is that he's as egotistical as Chandra. He's just framing it through the language of non-ego. And I think that, and we always know, it's not what people say. We can sense ego. Ego is something that you feel energetically, intuitively. So Chandra senses that, and the two of them clash. Their egos meet and they clash. Even while Steve is talking the language of non-violence, he literally uses non-violent communication. This Californian language, which I'm actually quite like, but he's using it in a somewhat disingenuous way. So while speaking the language of non-violence, he's actually being violent underneath. Chandra recognizes that, so he uses the more overt language of violence and punches him on the nose, which doesn't feel unacceptable to the reader because of that covert language of violence that Steve is using. And I think the thing is that the two of them are really equals, even though Chandra has this tremendous status in terms of being an economist out there in the world and being famous and highly intelligent in his field. And Steve has this status through being the progressive, the one who understands children and could say lots of spiritual things. But actually, when it comes down to it, they're basically equals because neither of them has gone anywhere near conquering their egos. So that's really it.
One of the most powerful moments in the novel occurs when Chandra hugs a young girl at the Indian Institute, apologizing for his behavior. How did you explore the theme of vulnerability in the book, and what does it say about the human need for connection and forgiveness, which is, again, Rajiv, the toughest? I mean, people say, okay, you forgive this person and you forgive that person, but oh my God, I think to reach that level of forgiveness means walking through multiple layers of fire. And I don't know if everybody has the gumption to do it. So let's just walk us through this entire, you know, part of the novel.
Yeah. So what's happening is that there's a girl, young woman, at the workshop who hates him. She's like his daughter's age, and she just sees her father, this authoritarian Indian man, and he sees a spoiled brat. Um, and I think through the course of the workshop, he's able to see how much pain she's in, and he's able to see that he loves his daughter even if she hates him, and that's why he's able to finally at the end stop fighting back because he's just seeing pain and he's not really seeing blame anymore. He's just seeing pain, and she doesn't really know what she's saying. When we're blaming, we don't really know what we're doing. We just know that we're in pain. We don't know where the pain is coming from. The forgiveness part yeah, this is I think probably the thing that, I've been doing all this spirituality work for what, almost 20 years, and this is the part that I've only just started to understand. I've asked everyone, what is forgiveness, and tried to figure it out for myself. For me, forgiveness is something that happens almost automatically once you heal, because you don't need to blame somebody if you're no longer being hurt by them. It means there's nothing to forgive anymore. Uh, if you don't have that wound inside of you, if it's not causing you continuous pain, or if you found a way to work with that pain that doesn't involve anybody else, it's just you working with those wounds, then the other person doesn't really matter anymore. So you're free to be anything towards them. You're free to tell them, well, go away, don't want you in my life, or you're free to tell them, come and give me a hug, but you don't have to hate them anymore, and you don't have to fear them anymore, and you don't have to blame them. So that to me is what forgiveness is.
Oh my God, it is a huge journey. It's a huge journey, my God. So, the family dynamics in Professor Chandra follows his bliss are strained. With Chandra's strained relationships with his children, particularly his daughter Radha, why did you choose to focus on these generational conflicts, and what message do you hope that readers take from Chandra's attempts to mend these rifts? What is it that they need to learn? Because we know so many today, it's only now that people are talking about family dynamics for the first time, also in India, which was, I mean, you would be considered shameless to speak about it. It's only now that people are opening up. So I think your answer would really help a lot of people who are still trying to find those answers.
Well, he's able to heal the family risk the only possible way that anyone can do, which is by trying and by looking at himself and working on himself. It's about him first, not about them. Don't try and change your children, change your wife. That's not going to work. You can only change you, and that has incredibly powerful effects on the people around you. Even if you only change yourself, a little bit, that those ripple effects can be way more powerful. So that's what he discovers. And he discovers it by trying everything else. He tries the whole authoritarianism thing. He tries, you know, throwing money around. It doesn't work. The only thing that actually works is looking at yourself, self-awareness, looking at your own ego. So yeah, that's the only message I think that I can give there. The other thing is that with relational dynamics and family dynamics, the hierarchy has to go. And I think that's what's happening now, slowly. And I think that's what's causing such enormous upheaval. It's the idea that an elder is automatically superior. I think we kind of knew that the whole time. We were just too
Yeah,
afraid.
we never had the courage to call it out.
We always knew that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we just couldn't say it. And I think that now people are starting to say it, and people are starting to understand the concept of boundaries. People are going no contact with their family, which never really happened before, or understanding financial independence. And it's causing absolute mayhem.
It is.
Big shifts cause mayhem. And also this idea that you're not responsible for another person's emotions. I think when I first began my therapy, I was just, what the hell? Is that actually true? And then I realized, I looked deeper into it. Yeah, of course it's true. Because we're only responsible for ourselves. We can't be
Yeah.
responsible for another person's emotions, even if
Yes.
we want to.
Yes.
So, all of these ideas are here to shake things up. And I think what it is there is an American transpersonal philosopher called Ken Wilber. Now, what he said is that there are 4 levels to spiritual growth. Wake up, which is the one that we know because it's been there for a few thousand years, right? Reaching nirvana and enlightenment. It's a mystical process. And then there's growing up. Now, that's the one that we've neglected, which is moving through these different stages so that we're not just in an I'm right, you're wrong frame of mind, but we reach a level of emotional maturity where we can actually listen to people's critiques of us, where we can say, yes, you're right, but there's also this, holding multiple positions at the same time. And then he has cleanup, which is the one that, it's also one that I was looking at in the novel, which is the shadow work. When you look at the parts of yourselves that you've disowned, when you reach self-awareness of the sort of darker aspects of your own psyche. And I think all of those are vital to having healthy relationships. You can't just have one. And it's certainly, you can't have healthy relationships via hierarchy. What you then get is fake relationships, fantasy bonds and pseudo shows of respect, and which is all actually based on fear and compulsion and obedience. And that's not a harmonious family. That's just a family that can look harmonious from the outside. That's not happiness.
I'm just short of words because, it rings so true for family dynamics across, families that I've met and my own dynamics too. So let's talk a little bit about Chandra's decision to follow his bliss is key to his evolution. So how did you, interpret this phase and how did you choose it as the title of the novel? What was the reason that you chose this?
Yeah. The quote comes from Joseph Campbell, who, the American sort of, what is the word for somebody who's an expert on mythology? Mythologist? I don't know. But so he was actually talking about it in a spiritual sense, and the quote became somewhat misused. But basically, what it's about is instead of following status or success or achievement or material glorification, look to what makes you happy. And for me, that for a lot of people, I think that's actually quite a radical concept, even though it sounds so obvious. So that's what it's all about. It's about this economist thinking, hang on, I've conquered the whole world, I've made money, I'm famous, I'm respected, but I'm miserable. Why? So that's where it comes from.
A question that I think requires tremendous maturity to ask your own self also, you know. So the novel really brings attention to the power of family in shaping one's identity. How did you want to address the idea of family legacy, which is such a talked about subject in India, and the ways in which our parents shape us for better or for worse? Both are there. Both there are two sides to this whole coin.
Family legacy, as in emotional legacy, or
Yes.
right? It took me a long time. It took me a few years to discover the concept of intergenerational trauma. I think it was first at Thich Nhat Hanh's monastery, and then through doing some workshops with Gabor Mate. Um, and as I understand it, trauma can run through a family for 7 generations. I look at some of the ways that my own parents have behaved, and where is this coming from? There's some dark stuff there. Where is it coming from? A lot of the time, we don't even know. I don't know very much about my great grandparents, let alone my great. I don't even know that much about my grandparents, if I'm honest. In fact, do I even know that much about my parents? I only know what they've told me. So a lot of the time, we don't even know where the trauma is coming from. We just know that it's in us. And eventually, if you can be, and I think with our generation or possibly the generation after us, we're the first people to even recognize that we're traumatized. The concept of trauma only emerged after the Vietnam War, when psychotherapists said, well, what is it? And they came with the concept of PTSD. But back then, PTSD meant you've had one horrific experience, like you've been in a bomb blast, or you've been raped, or you've been badly beaten up. But actually, now the understanding of trauma is with complex PTSD is that it's something that occurs over time as well. It doesn't have to be one experience, and that most of us are carrying trauma, and we don't always know where it's coming from. We just know we have it in our bodies. I've actually forgotten the question up, but I'll just keep going along. Our family
Yeah.
legacy. So, so in order to do that, we've got to look at our bodies and look at our own psyches and see that trauma and become aware of it. It also helps to see where it's come from, but we can only see as far as, well, our parents did this, our parents did that, so it's traumatized me. Why did they do that? We won't always know. And it's not always the most important question. The most important question is, what do I do about it? And so for me, well, the most important part of my life, or the key goal that I've had, I think, in the last 10 years was to prepare myself to have children so that I don't pass this trauma on. That was, and I said to myself, if I If I'm not ready, I'm not going to have children. I made that kind of and so I've been through hell. Like spiritual work, it sounds nice, but it's not. It's
No,
horrible.
it's really hell.
I mean, I've been through absolute hell, but I did it because, okay, on the negative side, I didn't want to pass the trauma on, so I confronted it, which was utterly terrifying until you realize there's nothing to be afraid of, 'cause it's just in the mind. And second of all, on the positive side, I wanted to be able to breathe some love into the world, to breathe love into a child, and maybe that act will actually have a net positive effect on the world. Otherwise, I just thought, well, why have children? I couldn't think of another reason. Obviously you've got your own personal reasons. You want to give love, but beyond that, I think a lot of people have children for all the wrong reasons. And it's
Absolutely.
and it's come to since having children, I've started to realize that I think a lot of people just didn't even want to have children. I mean, maybe some shocking, if you could actually get people to answer the question honestly, I think it could be like 80 or 90%. It could be something really crazy. They did it because some status reason, or because it's the thing to do, or because it's expected, or because your parents expect it, or because you want someone to look after you when you're older, or because you made all this money, what am I going to do with it? I don't want to give it to charity, I want to keep it somehow. So yeah, that's my understanding of legacy, is can we transform all the trauma into love?
You've highlighted about the fear of shame in South Asian families and, can prevent people from addressing their flaws, addictions, and even abuse. So how do you think we can start breaking the cycle of shame and respectability and create more open, honest spaces in our communities? And I will tell you a little about myself because I wrote a book. And these were letters to my father after he passed away about, some of the conflicts that we had, and they never ever got resolved. And exactly like how you said that I had to really delve deep down inside, confront my shame because it's not normal to talk, about your parent. And let me hear from you, what is it this whole process in which you highlighted this fear and shame, especially in South Asian families where this is taboo. People don't talk about it. And I've
Yeah.
actually had people who've gotten angry with me, who've
Oh
read the
yeah.
book.
Of course. Of
They're so
course.
hassled with me. And they've said, why would you do this? You have no shame. You were born from your parents and you could have not been in this world if they were not there. And they were so triggered. So this is not an easy subject to deal with, Rajiv. So tell me a little bit about you.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different things that leap to mind. Just a couple of examples from outside of India, but it applies. One is, I've forgotten his name, but there's a British guy, he worked in prisons, and he came up with something called, I think it was called shame and violence intervention. And what he realized, this just purely working with male prisoners, was that violence was always the result of shame. It's something you're terrified of other people seeing inside of you, that you have this feeling that you're protecting some dark evil, and that if other people see it, they'll come at you, and they'll expose you, and they'll execrate you, and so you mustn't let them see it, even if it means killing them. So he realized that he did these therapy sessions in the prison with men, and he realized that if he could work with that shame, and he would say to them, stay with it, stay with that feeling of shame, stay with it, then that's how he could work with the problem of violence. So there's that. The second thing is, I think that Oprah Winfrey's great contribution to American society I think it was in the 80s, was that she got women talking about sexual abuse. First time ever. The shame of sexual abuse is obviously not just an Indian thing. It's pretty
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
pretty global, and that was a huge thing, absolutely huge. That people realized, this is like what, 40 years before Me Too, or more. Um, People realized that, yeah, you can talk about this. It's actually nothing to be ashamed of. It's not, and why are you ashamed of it? You're carrying somebody else's shame. You're actually carrying the abuser's shame. It's the abuser who's ashamed. But why are we carrying that shame? All right. I think that's what it's about. Shame often is a way for the abuser to protect themselves. So you transfer that shame onto the abused. And the abuser and the abuser are always in this complex dance, and it's very difficult to separate the two, to see what belongs to the abuser and what belongs to the abused. it's this bizarrely intimate connection that the abuser and the abused forms, and it's very, very hard to disentangle. So I think that's kind of the root of it. For me, shame is rooted in the feeling that you'll be expelled from the tribe. And it probably goes back to hunter-gatherer times when if you're expelled from the tribe, then you die. Um,
Yeah. You don't belong.
well, you'll die of starvation or hunger. It was the times when you couldn't fend for yourselves. Uh, yeah, which can also be true today at times. It's that fear of being told you're bad, you can't be with us anymore, you're bad, and that fear keeps us in line, and tremendous acts of violence have been committed against people who stepped out of line. Uh, in terms of marriage, in terms of sexuality, for caste reasons, and the violence is unspeakable and endless. So I think that's where the shame comes from. It's a sort of valid and legitimate fear, but it's
Yeah.
always misplaced. So to come out of shame, we have to see it in ourselves and just really look at it and really see what is it. And that for me is where inner child work is so important. It's because my first ever therapist told me do inner child meditation, and she gave me this computer printout, and I thought, okay, this is silly. How can I talk to my inner child? That's absurd. It sounded like the most Californian load of crap I could possibly think of, until I actually did it. And it's incredibly powerful. It's an imaginative exercise where you find that scared, ashamed child who can't trust anyone, who's terrified. You visualize it so strongly in your mind, and you give them love. You let them know that there's nothing wrong with them, that you love them unconditionally, that they're safe and that they can trust you. And by doing that, and that usually involves a lot of crying. And I think coming out of shame involves a lot of crying. I did a lot of crying. And once you can do that and really grieve for that child, grieve with that child, then to me that's the first step in coming out of shame. It's always rooted in the child, I find.
Of course it is. It is always rooted in our childhood because that's where the blackboard is. And it really triggers people when I say this, because they will give you so many reasons to say that, you need to be grateful, you cannot talk like that, and, all of those things in which probably they've not been able to break. And they tell you that, yes, I've also gone through all of this, but you don't need to talk about it. But, as authors, as writers, that's what we are born to do, right? Rajiv, how did people around you react? I mean, let's just talk while you wrote this book and, for you to do this internal work for yourself. Were people triggered with it?
With the novel, not really, as far as I can see. I mean, some people didn't say anything, but as far as I can see, not really. I think that's the benefit of fiction. If you can entertain someone, tell them a good story, they often feel a lot less triggered. They're following somebody else's journey. People get triggered by my videos where I'm just saying it. But my fiction, if because I write in quite a light way, I use a lot of humor, and I think these are my strengths as a writer. I can come up with characters people can relate to, and I think then they get lost in that, and it generally it's a way of kind of concealing the triggering stuff. Because this actually isn't something to be afraid of, the things I'm talking about. We just are because of our conditioning. But I think if you can
Oh,
get
yeah.
lost inside a story, then you feel less frightened. The stories don't
Yes, when
feel
you're
so.
inside a story, you feel less frightened. Absolutely. So, Professor Chandra follows his bliss is about a man's journey to find happiness, and meditation plays a role in this entire transformation. So, how do you think mindfulness and self-awareness helps people really navigate their relationships and past choices, as we see with Chandra and his family? And sometimes the choices that we make in the past are not exactly the most thought through decisions that we've taken. So, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, the first time I did, so I've done a lot of, well, the first time I did a 10-day Vipassana meditation course, that was really my introduction to hardcore
Oh
meditation.
my God, that must have been difficult as hell.
I've done a lot of them now. They've all been difficult. They're always hard. But the first one was crazy. I mean, I didn't know, it was like, oh, get up at 4 in the morning and you tend to sit for 10 hours and in so much physical pain. But yeah, I knew it. Yeah, I knew that once I committed to it, I'd do it because I'm very stubborn and well, determined is maybe a nicer way of putting it. So I did it and I put everything into it. And then afterwards I fell apart in a really spectacular way. Couldn't stop crying. And the first thing I said was, I don't like myself. And that was the beginning of self-awareness. It was like, the third eye had been opened. Suddenly I was starting to, which is not it sounds pretty, but it's not. It was incredibly painful because I had to look at myself. And the first thing I saw was that deep, deep level of shame. And then kept looking, kept looking, kept looking. And over time, with a lot of psychotherapy and various other spiritual tools and psychotherapeutic tools, I was able to forgive myself. Actually, there wasn't that much to forgive. I'd just been told I was a bad person. I wasn't really. But I think that even if you have
Of
done,
course, you're not.
I think even if you have done terrible things, you can forgive yourself by recognizing that you live here right now and that you didn't know what you were doing in the past. Um, Recently, I was listening to a talk by Thich Nhat Hanh where he was saying that he'd had Vietnam veterans who had killed children in his monastery, and they intensive practice for 2 weeks, and their eyes were just glazed. And then a certain point would come where they could really look at what they'd done, and then they'd enter that world of sorrow and grief and so on. But at least it would be like the bursting of a cloud. And from there, once they'd gone through that process of grief and confronting those feelings of guilt and shame, then they were able to actually do something about it, to make amends in some way, to, like one person who'd killed children, what Thich Nhat Hanh said is, okay, there are so many children in America dying today of various reasons. Why don't you do some work to save those children? This person did, and he sort of returned to society and returned to himself. So for me, once you're able to really look at yourself and really go through those feelings that come up, then you can start to forgive yourself.
You discuss how craving can lead to suffering. In your opinion, what's the most powerful way someone new to meditation can practice letting go of desires, attachments, especially in today's goal-driven world, which is really tough, and I'm asking that for myself.
Mm, well, I mean, that's the process of all processes. That's, to me, that's why we're here, is to do that. I found for that, that's where my meditation practice is the most valuable thing, particularly observation of the body, and recognizing how we're so physically drawn towards craving and addiction and um, the pursuit of wealth and status and success without question. But the thing that I've been working with recently is the desire to be free from craving, which I found is my strongest desire, the desire for nirvana or to be free of suffering. And what I realized is that that's been tying myself in knots. So, it's been stopping me from actually letting go, because it's so, it's this such it's holding on very tight to something out of fear. It's actually, you're afraid of the suffering, so that's why you want to come out of it so much. And what I realized is that it's self-acceptance and acceptance of my own pain is a much more powerful way of dealing with craving than looking to the future and, to a future date where I'll be free of it completely. Just to accept, and also accepting the times when I'm not doing particularly well, when I'm feeling anxious, when I get angry, when I behave like an idiot, accepting that too, and still trying to feel compassion for myself in those moments. That to me has been, I think, the most powerful practice.
As a writer, you have experience with both fiction and non-fiction. So how does your approach differ from writing a novel like Professor Chandra follows his bliss, as opposed to writing essays or journalistic pieces?
Well, I mean, fiction was what came most naturally to me. But then I started writing journalism. It took me a little while. I had to sort of understand how to do it, how to put my personality into it, and how to enjoy language just as much, but in a nonfiction format. What I'm finding is it's a lot easier. It's a
Hmm.
lot easier to write nonfiction.
Truly, fiction is tough.
Fiction is tough.
It's
Uh,
damn tough.
and I'm really enjoying it. I think the problem with nonfiction was that um, when you're trying to convey an idea, you can let go of your own writing style sometimes and just be very focused on research. So what I eventually realized was that all of this research that I'd done, the books I've read, and the experience, that my attitude is that I've done that so the reader doesn't have to, and that I can translate it all into my own voice, and create something new rather than telling the reader what all these different people have said. So that's kind of my approach to nonfiction.
The ending of Professor Chandra Follows His Bliss is uplifting yet open-ended, So why did you choose to leave certain aspects of the story unresolved? And what does it say about the nature of personal growth?
It never ends. There is no resolution. It just never ends. That's why I was talking about this fantasy of enlightenment. One day I'll reach enlightenment. I mean, the Buddha reached enlightenment, but only when, for 50 years. Yeah, it just never ends. What has changed for me is that the last couple of years, I'm kind of happy with who I am. But that doesn't mean that the healing journey has ended. It's just going on
It's
and on.
ongoing.
And then you find, it's like climbing a mountain. You think you've reached the top, and then you see, oh, it goes on, or you find new things about yourself that you need to work on. At the beginning, the first 10 years or so, I was going at it like a maniac. I was working so hard. In fact, the whole time I worked so hard. I can't do that now because I have a child, but also it was a period where I required an almost fundamentalist level of discipline. And now I'm a bit more chilled out. But yeah, I don't think it ever stops. There's no point you get to where everything is great. And even if you get to a place where you're very happy with yourself, things are going to go wrong all the time.
Oh, yeah.
I
When
mean,
you least expected.
when a close friend of mine died a week ago, and suddenly I was just plunged into hell. I was like, "Whoa, okay, I didn't see that coming." And you just never know what's going to happen in life, including you think you can handle your life now, and then suddenly you're thrown into a space that is completely new and you can't handle at all, and that's
And that's life.
that's infinite. Yeah.
One book that changed your life.
Ooh. Well, the first book that changed my life was Ignateshwaran's Conquest of Mind, which is a very simple introduction to meditation. That was really, really powerful. It rearranged the whole world for me because I realized that everything actually begins in the mind and not out there. And by working on ourselves, we can change our reality rather than by working out there.
What advice would you give to young writers, Rajeev?
Well, I think not to pursue success too hard because success doesn't solve your problems. And you're going to go through periods where you're not successful. If you get success at the beginning, then the middle may be really rough. Or if you have success in the middle, then yeah, or you have loads of success and you're absolutely miserable. So just not to worry too much about success. Obviously, it's a perfectly valid thing to want. We all want to be successful, but that's not the be all and end all of writing. And unfortunately, since the 80s or perhaps 90s when these $1 million advances began and everything, that's a very alluring thing.
It is very alluring.
I've met people who've had $250,000 advances and it's ruined their lives. So, yeah, just try to take it easy on the pursuit of success. I'm not saying this because I'm some sort of spiritual practitioner. It's very, very practical and down to earth and logical, actually, once you've been around the block a little bit.
Thank you so much, Raji, for taking out the time and being on today's podcast. It was an absolute honor to have you. And I follow your work every day on Instagram. And you probably are not even aware how you touch our lives in such beautiful, sublime ways and, give answers to things that we are always searching for. So please continue the good work, Rajiv. And thank you for taking out the time and being on my podcast today.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
And that wraps up today's insightful conversation with Rajeev Balasubramanyam. From exploring the complexities of following your bliss to addressing the unspoken truths of shame and family, we've uncovered some deep, thought provoking ideas. So before you go, here's a thought for you. How can you begin to let go of the labels and expectations that are holding you back from living your life, your true, authentic life? And what would it mean to start embracing